September 1944. The sky above Borneo shimmered with the haze of equatorial heat. Far below, oil fires burned black against the sea, while in the thin air, at 25,000 feet, a silver shape cut through the light, Major Richard Ira Bong's P-38 Lightning. Twin Allison engines purred in perfect harmony, a metallic heartbeat of 3,000 horsepower. Inside the cockpit, Bong's gloved hand adjusted the trim tab ever so slightly, the motion of a man who trusted precision more than luck. Through the bulletproof glass, he scanned the sky below. Japanese fighters, Ki-43 Oscars, and A-6M-0s were clawing upward, desperate to reach a formation of B-24 Liberators, lumbering toward the Balikpapan oil fields. They had no idea that above them, poised like a hawk over prey, waited the deadliest American fighter pilot of the war. Richard Ira Bong didn't look like a killer. A soft-spoken farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, his face carried the calm of the northern woods, more than the swagger of an ace. Yet, in that moment as he eased his Lightning into a shallow dive, he was a craftsman at work, calculating angles, energy, and timing with the instinct of a born marksman. Each deflection shot he took was the product of geometry, physics, and nerve. He'd already destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft. By war's end, the count would reach 40 confirmed victories, making him America's ace of aces, a record that 8 decades later remains untouched. But records are only echoes of something deeper, the quiet discipline of a man who had learned to master chaos. The P-38 Lightning itself was an anomaly, a twin-boom fighter that looked alien even to Allied crews when it first appeared. But its design was revolutionary: twin engines for range and safety counter-rotating propellers to cancel torque, a tricycle landing gear that made ground handling easy, and concentrated firepower in the nose 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns and one 20mm cannon. When that cone of fire found its target, the result was instant disintegration. To Japanese pilots, the Lightning was a ghost appearing from the sun, striking once and vanishing before a counterattack could form. To American bomber crews, it was a guardian angel, the silver flash that meant they might make it home. But this was no story of natural aggression or fearless recklessness. Bong's path to the skies above Borneo had begun with something far less heroic: a disciplinary reprimand in California that nearly ended his career before it started. His rise from chastised novice to America's greatest fighter pilot would be built not on audacity, but on discipline, learning, and relentless refinement, turning instinct into method and method into legend. And so, as the Pacific sun burned white above the clouds, Major Bong began his dive, his crosshairs steady, his mind silent, his place in history only seconds away. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever heard of Richard Bong before? A quiet man in a blazing sky? What do you think of his beginnings? A year before the skies of Borneo, Richard Bong was not yet a legend, just another second lieutenant learning to handle the temperamental power of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. It was the spring of 1942 at Hamilton Field, California, a place where the air smelled of oil and ambition. Bong was freshly graduated from Luke Field, Arizona, still awkward in his new flight jacket, still learning the edge between control and danger. That line blurred one morning when he performed a low-altitude roll over San Francisco Bay, skimming rooftops and drawing cheers from startled civilians. To the Army Air Forces, though, it wasn't bravado, it was insubordination. His actions violated every regulation in the book. Word traveled fast up the chain of command, reaching Major General George C. Kenney, the man who would later command the 5th Air Force in the Southwest Pacific. Kenney was not amused. The reprimand was immediate and severe. But Kenney was also perceptive. Beneath Bong's youthful recklessness, he saw something rare: reflexes faster than thought, a natural coordination that made the aircraft seem an extension of his own body. Most pilots learn to fly. Bong seemed born to it. Rather than ending his career, Kenney offered him something better: more training, more responsibility, and one more chance. This act of leniency would change American air combat. Bong was placed under observation and retrained with emphasis on discipline, both in the cockpit and in judgment. He learned to channel the same daring that got him into trouble into calculated precision. It was here on the airfields of California that he first heard the phrase that would define his career: "Don't be flashy, be effective." Kenny's assessment proved prophetic. Bong's depth perception was exceptional, allowing him to judge distance and closure rates instinctively. This gift would later make him a master of deflection, shooting firing not at where an enemy was, but where he would be in the next heartbeat. By September 1942, Bong was assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, preparing for deployment to New Guinea as part of Kenny's 5th Air Force. His flight time was limited, his combat experience non-existent. In contrast, the enemy he would soon face, the Japanese, had been fighting continuously since 1937, hardened by campaigns over China, the Philippines, and the Pacific. For the young American pilots, the odds seemed grim. Their aircraft were new, their tactics untested, and their enemy confident. But the Pacific War was a brutal teacher, and the lessons came fast. As Bong packed his gear for the long journey west, he carried with him two things: the formal reprimand that still rested in his file, and the belief of a general who had seen potential in a boy from Wisconsin. The next time Bong would test his skills, it wouldn't be over San Francisco. It would be over the steaming jungles of New Guinea, where mistakes were measured not in demerits, but in lives. New Guinea, December 1942. The air was thick, hot, and heavy, the kind that smelled of salt and burning avgas. American ground crews, their boots sinking into red mud, watched as the 9th Fighter Squadron roared into the sky. The young pilots, barely out of training, were about to face the enemy for the first time. Among them was Lieutenant Richard Bong, flying in the wing position, his P-38 Lightning gleaming like a silver spear against the clouds. The mission was simple on paper: intercept a formation of Mitsubishi Ki-21 bombers, escorted by A-6M-0 fighters, approaching Allied positions near Buna. But there was nothing simple about combat. The Japanese pilots had years of experience. Many had fought in China long before the United States entered the war. They were veterans of dogfights, measured in seconds, and lived by instincts sharpened through constant danger. As the formations closed, Bong saw the first flashes tracer fire, stitching the air ahead. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but focus. The P-38 Lightning was a new breed of Machine 2 engines, twin booms, tricycle landing gear, and a concentrated nose armament of 4 50-caliber machine guns and a 20mm Hispano cannon. It could reach 400 mm and climb to 40,000 feet speeds the Japanese Zero could not match. But it was heavier, slower to turn, and dangerous to mishandle. The Zero, light and nimble, could pirouette inside the P-38's turn radius and tear apart anyone foolish enough to fight on its terms. Many Americans tried and died. Bong didn't. From his first encounters, he understood the Lightning's strengths, altitude, speed, and firepower. Instead of twisting into the enemy's traps, he attacked from above, diving through the bomber formations like a falcon through pigeons. His bursts were short and precise. When his guns spoke, they spoke only once. Through the gun sight, he learned a pilot's most important discipline: patience. Don't dogfight, he would later tell new recruits. Position, fire, leave. That day, the tactic worked. Bong's first confirmed kill was clean and clinical as Zero that tried to climb after him and failed. The Japanese plane burst into flames, spiraling into the jungle canopy below. For Bong, there was no whoop of victory, no exultation. He wrote later in his combat report, only the essentials. Engaged 2 enemy fighters at 14,000 score, fired 1 burst. 1 confirmed destroyed. Nothing more. In those first missions over Buna, Bong learned what the Pacific War demanded: control, under chaos, patience, under pressure, and respect for an enemy who was as skilled as he was deadly. The Lightning itself taught him humility. In a dive too steep, compressibility could lock the controls, turning the aircraft into a bullet from which no one escaped. Dozens of pilots perished, discovering the aircraft's limits. Bong studied each failure like a craftsman examining broken tools. By the end of that month, the lessons were etched into his instincts. The formula was simple but absolute: speed, altitude, precision. He wasn't just fighting the Japanese. He was learning how to survive them. And in doing so, he was quietly crafting the blueprint that would make him the most successful fighter pilot in American history. By early 1943, Richard Bong was no longer the wide-eyed lieutenant who'd arrived in New Guinea with trembling hands and a second chance. The boy who once rolled over San Francisco had become a disciplined predator of the Pacific skies. His name began circulating through mess tents and after-action reports whispered with respect by both pilots and ground crews alike. The transformation didn't come from luck, it came from method. Bong was building something few pilots ever achieved: a system. He approached combat not as chaos, but as mathematics in motion angles, closure rates, time to fire, and the art of deflection shooting. Deflection was the holy grail of aerial marksmanship, predicting where your target would be, not where it was. Most pilots overestimated firing too soon or too late. Bong somehow could feel the future. He anticipated the movement of enemy aircraft, as if he'd read the next frame of film before it developed. In his mind, the air battle slowed, every vector and speed resolved into a solvable equation. His technique was simple in description, but nearly impossible in execution. He would stalk his target patiently, often spending minutes adjusting his altitude and position until the perfect angle appeared. Then, he would close fast, too fast for his opponent to react, and fire a brief, devastating burst. The guns in the P-38's nose spat out a dense, converging cone of metal. When Bong pulled the trigger, entire enemy aircraft vanished in a blink. Major Thomas Lynch, his comrade in the 49th Fighter Group, later said Bong was patient. He didn't waste a single round. When he fired, something died. That calm efficiency was reflected in the numbers. Bong's average ammunition used per kill was less than half of most pilots in the theater. But Bong's art wasn't only in flying. It was in not fighting. He refused to let adrenaline dictate his decisions. If the odds were wrong, he disengaged without shame. Live to fight well, he'd say, not just to fight. To new arrivals, many of them barely out of their teens, Bong became a quiet mentor. He taught them that survival in the Pacific was not about bravado, but about control. In the jungles below, war was noise and chaos. In the sky above, Bong made it look like choreography. His P-38 glided through the sun's glare, diving, striking, and disappearing always at the moment of maximum advantage. Maintenance crews noticed how his gun barrels showed even scorch patterns, never the overburn of panic fire. His engine cowlings were always immaculate. He treated his Lightning like a Stradivarius tuned to perfection. The war itself was shifting. American factories were flooding the Pacific with aircraft. Training was improving, but losses remained high. Every ace became a symbol of morale, a reminder that mastery could triumph over madness. Bong's developing philosophy, discipline as dominance, was spreading quietly through his squadron. By the summer of 1943, as the 5th Air Force advanced along the New Guinea coast, Bong's reputation had evolved from promising pilot to precision craftsman. Each victory wasn't a thrill, it was a proof of concept. And though he never sought fame, the numbers began to speak for him. In the deadly calculus of air war, Richard Ira Bong was solving the equation. By late 1943, the boy from Wisconsin had become a name known across the Pacific. Bong's kills were climbing steadily, each one noted in terse combat reports that never betrayed emotion. By November 1943, his tally reached 21 confirmed victories, earning him the Distinguished Service Cross. General George C. Kenney himself pinned the medal to Bong's uniform, remarking that the pilot's calm precision was unlike anything he'd seen in the theater. Soon after Bong was sent home for a war bond tour, the Army Air Force's attempt to put a human face on victory. Across America, posters showed his smile clean-cut, modest, almost shy. Crowds cheered him as a hero, but Bong found the adulation awkward. In letters to Marjorie Vattendahl, his sweetheart back in Poplar, he confessed he longed for the cockpit. "I'm no celebrity," he wrote. "I just do my job." By early 1944, he had his wish. Reassigned to the P-38 Lightning, Bong returned to New Guinea with a sharper edge and a more refined machine. The J model boasted improved engines, better cockpit heating, and hydraulically boosted ailerons that allowed smoother control in high-speed dives, exactly the kind of flying Bong perfected. The Japanese, once the masters of Pacific air combat, were changing. The attrition of years of war had drained their veteran ranks. The men Bong faced now were often younger, less experienced in flying older machines. Yet, they remained dangerous, driven by the same devotion that made them formidable from the beginning. In April 1944, above Hollandia, Bong led his unit in escorting bombers toward heavily defended targets. The sky shimmered with contrails as Japanese interceptors climbed to meet them. Bong's formations moved with clockwork discipline. Altitude advantage secured attacks timed perfectly. His voice over the radio was calm, clipped, never louder than necessary. 2 o'clock high. Break right. Dive now. The rhythm of a man who saw the air as a living map. His tactics were elegant in their simplicity. Maintain energy by staying high. Use speed for attack and disengagement. Never linger in a turning fight. And always strike with precision. The results were devastating. In one engagement, his element destroyed 4 enemy aircraft in less than 2 minutes, without losing a single Lightning. By June 1944, Bong's confirmed score climbed to 28, surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record, and making him America's highest-scoring ace. The press called him the Ace of Aces, a title he wore uneasily. To Bong, victory wasn't a number, it was the survival of his comrades and the protection of the bombers that depended on him. General Kenny, fearful of losing his best pilot, grounded him from routine missions. "You're too valuable," he told Bong. But Bong bristled under the restriction. A bird built for the clouds cannot bear the cage even one made of praise. Kenny eventually compromised Bong could fly, but only lead high-priority missions with veteran escorts to cover him. Yet, even limited to select operations, Bong's kill count continued to rise. He was now more than an ace. He was a symbol. For bomber crews, hearing Bong's voice on the radio meant hope. For the enemy, spotting the P-38 marked Marge on the nose meant death was near. Every flight carried him closer to the record that no one would surpass, and unknowingly closer to the end of his own journey through war. The heat above Balikpapan, Borneo, was the kind that shimmered like molten glass. It was October 1944, and American B-24 Liberators droned toward the oil refineries that kept Japan's war machine alive. Below them, anti-aircraft guns barked and squadrons of Japanese fighters clawed upward. Above it all, Major Richard Ira Bong's P-38 Lightning Marge cut a deliberate path through the sky. The mission was chaos, wrapped in calculation. Bong led his element of lightnings with surgical precision, sun behind altitude-high attack, time to the second. As the enemy rose in formation, his flight dove through them like silver knives. The first pass shredded 2 fighters before the Japanese could even react. But this time, the hunter wasn't untouchable. Tracer rounds stitched across Bong's left wing. A sudden jolt, a coughing engine. Fire warning lights blinked to life. Most pilots would have broken off immediately, but Bong was not most pilots. He feathered the damaged propeller-cut fuel flow, triggered the fire extinguisher, and continued the fight on one engine. The Lightning, designed with redundancy, could still fly, but barely. Bong held altitude, lined up another attacker, and squeezed the trigger. A brief burst. One more kill. Then finally, he turned for home. When he landed, ground crews counted multiple hits across the fuselage and nacelle. The aircraft was deemed combat ineffective. Bong simply smiled and said, "She'll fly again." And she did. Within days, Marge was patched, rearmed, and back in the sky. By now, Bong's reputation bordered on myth. Crews in the South Pacific spoke of him the way soldiers once spoke of knights: calm, precise, almost unreal. Yet those who knew him best saw something else: a quiet man growing weary of war's arithmetic. 40 confirmed kills meant 40 men dead, and he carried that number like a weight. In December 1944, General Douglas MacArthur personally presented Bong with the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his gallantry and intrepidity, but MacArthur's private words were more paternal. "You've done enough, son." Orders came soon after Bong was to be grounded permanently. His last combat mission took place on December 17, 1944, a routine patrol with no enemy contact. When he landed, he removed his flight gloves and tucked them into his jacket pocket. He never flew in combat again. By year's end, Bong's total stood at 40 confirmed victories, achieved across more than 200 sorties, a record untouched in the annals of American aviation. The press crowned him America's ace of aces. Yet for Bong, the title felt hollow. His letters home spoke not of glory, but of relief that his friends might finally come home too. Behind him lay the burning skies of the Pacific. Ahead, an uncertain peace. Bong had survived what most men did not. But fate, as it often does, had one more cruel twist to offer the young man who'd mastered the art of staying alive. When Bong's P-38 Lightning was finally retired from combat duty, it didn't just mark the end of a pilot's career. It marked the beginning of a doctrine. What Bong had developed through instinct, experience, and restraint would soon become formal teaching for generations of American fighter pilots. His gun camera footage was studied like scripture at gunnery schools from Nadzab to Nellis Field. Trainees replayed his intercepts frame by frame, noting how he never fired until the target filled the sight ring. His bursts were brief, never more than a second, but devastatingly effective. Army Air Force's instructors began to build entire lessons around what they called Bong's principles: keep altitude advantage, strike from the sun, use speed to disengage, and above all, never turn with the enemy. The P-38 Lightning itself became part of that teaching. Designed by Lockheed's genius engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, it was an aircraft that demanded respect. Its long wings and twin booms made it stable at high speeds, while the turbo-supercharged Allison engines gave it range and altitude few rivals could match. Its tricycle landing gear eased handling on rough island airstrips, and its concentrated nose, armament for 50 caliber Browning machine guns, and one 20mm Hispano cannon meant that every bullet traveled in a single deadly line. When a pilot could master its quirks, the P-38 became poetry in motion. Bong had mastered it completely. Japanese pilots who survived the war later spoke of encounters with American fighters that seemed impossibly fast, attacking from blinding sunlight and vanishing before a counterstrike could form. They were describing the new doctrine born from Bong's methods, what historians later called the boom and zoom philosophy of air combat. But Bong's influence extended beyond tactics. In his letters to Marjorie Vatndal, he often reflected on what the war had made of him. "It isn't about how many you shoot down," he wrote. "It's how many you bring home." His calm professionalism began to shape the identity of American fighter culture: efficiency over aggression, patience over pride. More than 10,000 P-38s would be built before the war ended, serving from the Aleutians to the Philippines. Yet few pilots ever used the Lightning to its full potential as Bong did. He proved that discipline could be as lethal as daring, and that mastery, not madness, was the real mark of a warrior. When the war in the Pacific drew toward its fiery conclusion, Bong's methods had already become part of the Air Force's DNA. What began as one pilot's personal system of survival had evolved into a doctrine of precision that would guide American aviators for decades. The man who once danced too low over San Francisco had turned that reckless grace into a science of war and a legacy that outlasted every dogfight he ever fought. The war was ending, but fate wasn't done with Richard Ira Bong. August 6, 1945, Burbank, California. The sun hung pale over the Lockheed Air Terminal, glinting off rows of aircraft that represented the next age of flight. The P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, was ready for testing. And the man chosen to help tame it was none other than Major Richard Bong, the ace of aces. Now 24 years old, newly married to Marjorie Vattendahl, and assigned as a Lockheed test pilot. He was stepping from one era into another. The P-80, sleek and strange, had no propellers, no comforting thrum of twin Allisons. Its jet engine produced over 4,000 pounds of thrust, propelling it beyond 500 miles per hour, a speed no piston fighter could match. To Bong, it was both thrilling and alien. The flight manual spoke of compressor stalls and flameouts concepts, foreign to men raised on propeller-driven craft. Yet, as always, he approached the new machine the way he had approached war itself, with methodical precision and quiet confidence. That afternoon, during a routine acceptance flight, something went wrong. Shortly after takeoff, the jet's fuel pump failed. The engine flamed out almost instantly. Bong tried the restart procedure, throttle idle ignition on pump to prime, but the altimeter was spinning down too fast. Below 500 feet, there was no margin for error. Witnesses on the ground saw the P-80 nose over, then attempt to level. At the last second, the canopy jettisoned. But the altitude was too low. The aircraft struck the ground and exploded in a flash of white fire. America's greatest fighter pilot was gone in an instant. The news should have shaken the world. But that same day, 6,000 miles away, another aircraft, the B-29 Enola Gay, released an atomic bomb over Hiroshima, Japan. Newspapers were filled with the dawn of the atomic age. Bong's death, once front-page news, was reduced to a paragraph beneath the headlines. In his hometown of Poplar, Wisconsin, the telegram arrived quietly. The people who'd gathered for VJ celebrations fell silent. A church bell rang that night, not for victory, but for one of their own. Today, inside the Richard I. Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, visitors can see his Medal of Honor, the flight logs that record his 200 combat missions, and a restored P-38 Marge gleaming under museum lights. The paintwork on the nose, his sweetheart's name, seems to smile still. 80 years on Bong's record of 40 confirmed victories remains untouched and likely always will. Modern air combat fought beyond visual range with missiles, and radar leaves no room for the kind of intimate, nerve-tight duels Bong mastered. His legend endures not because of aggression, but because of control. Every shot he fired was measured. Every maneuver was planned. Every risk was chosen, never chanced. He proved that in the chaos of aerial war, precision could be its own form of courage. Now the jungles where he fought have swallowed the wreckage of enemy planes. The skies he once ruled are calm again. Yet somewhere above those silent clouds, history still carries his name, a reminder that greatness is not noise or fury, but the quiet mastery of one man who refused to waste a single moment of flight. When I think about Richard Bong, I don't just see a record, I see a man who mastered himself before he mastered the sky. His calm, his discipline, his refusal to waste even a second of life or flight, that's what makes his story unforgettable. In a war that glorified speed and fire, Bong proved that precision and restraint could be even more powerful. If stories like this move you the way they move me, consider subscribing not just to follow history, but to feel it one quiet hero at a time.